Welcome back to Wartime Cafe. I'm your host, Laith Marouf, and you are watching Free Palestine TV. We are in Barzakh Cafe in Hamra once again. Very gracious hosts that have us all the time. And we have with us a special guest today, Professor Edward Alam, who is the chairholder of the Benedict XVI Endowed Chair of Religion, Culture, and Philosophical Studies at the Notre Dame University here in Lebanon. Thank you very much, Dr. Edward, Professor Edward, for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, since you're the first time here on our show, I'm sure the audience would love to know about your background. You have a very colorful background and a story I think everybody will enjoy hearing. You were born in Utah in the United States.
Yes.
And you are second generation Lebanese American.
That's right.
Your grandfather left Ain Ibil in the south of Lebanon in the 1920s.
Yeah, 1920. Yeah.
So tell us about being born in the United States, having this background.
Yes.
How did this drive you to be who you are today?
Yes, thank you, Laith. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Yes, well, my father was born in the States as well, but when he was born, 1932, there was, I think, more of an emphasis on becoming American. So, for instance, he grew up speaking Arabic until he was, I think, 9 or 10, but he tells the story of his mother dropped him off at school and gave him some instructions in Arabic what to do after school. And then when he went into class, the teacher asked him to stand up and said, tell your mother she's in America now and she doesn't have to speak Turkish. She should learn English. So he went home and he told his mom, don't speak to me in Arabic anymore. And so he was always proud of his Lebanese roots, my father, God rest his soul. But the emphasis there was to really become American. And in the second generation, and this is often the case, with immigration communities, they take more of an interest in their grandfather's old country or old land. And that happened to me and my sister, and I think most of my siblings, but my sister and I especially, identified with being Lebanese, and we're very proud to be Lebanese. And my father and mother, who was also Lebanese descent, instilled that in us, but they didn't speak the language anymore. They knew the foods and certain things, so I grew up sort of loving Lebanon. Lebanon was a magical place for me growing up without knowing anything about it.
My brother-in-law is from Utah, by the way.
Oh,
I never told you this before. No. And I didn't go to Utah, but I could imagine from all the things that he was telling me, as a Lebanese American in Utah, there's not big community there of Lebanese. It's either the East Coast or West Coast usually.
Basically, yeah.
So do you feel this upbringing there in Utah was different for you than, let's say, the other Arab Americans in the rest of the U.S.?
Oh, I think so, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, because as you said, we didn't have a large Arabic-speaking community. But the Lebanese who were there, at the University of Utah is the major university. There were a number of important Lebanese doctors, and they got to know my grandfather. So since there weren't many, it was really a treat for them to come to my grandfather's shop and speak Arabic to him. So I think it was sort of a special case where we knew we were only a few, but proud to be Lebanese, and I guess our identity too. Most of the Lebanese who came to Utah were Christian, and
There's that whole Mormon thing also.
Right. Well, that's the other, exactly. That
Yeah.
was the other thing. So Utah's about 85% Mormon, right? So the LDS Church. So the Catholics, who were a minority, would also identify with one another. There was a Catholic high school that my father went to, all my uncles and aunts, my mother. It's the only Catholic high school in the city. And so all the Italians, the Irish, all my aunts and uncles, well, most of them married Irish Catholics or Italian. So, so we did, the LDS influence also played a role in our identity.
And you ended up marrying a Lebanese woman, amazing, I met her, and she managed to bring you back here. So tell us about this journey.
Yes, well, I think it was mutual, and so actually she was in the States she was in Washington, D.C. and working for the Lebanese Taverna, which her aunt and uncle own. And I was studying to be a Maronite Catholic priest in Washington, D.C. I left Utah, studied for a couple of years in San Diego at a Catholic university, University of San Diego. Then met a very charismatic Catholic Maronite priest, a young priest, and was inspired by him to study philosophy and theology and to become a priest. So I went to Washington, D.C., where the Maronite seminary is, Our Lady of Lebanon. And I finished my studies there, but before I got ordained a priest, I left and got married. Because in those days, Laith, we're Eastern Catholics, so according to our canon law, we can marry as Catholic priests as long as we're married before we're ordained. Yeah, which is not the case in the Latin Rite, of course, which is the largest of the 25 or 26 rites, rites, from ritual in the Catholic Church. So there was talk in the 80s of allowing the Eastern Catholic churches to return to their tradition, married priesthood. So a couple of us were still thinking that we would get married before we're priests, but then came time to be ordained and there was no change in the canon law, so I left.
And you moved here in 1987.
Actually no, I met my wife in 87. She was there. I met her at this Lebanese restaurant, and then in 88 we came to Lebanon and got married. The war was raging. The airport was closed. We flew to Cyprus and then took a boat to Juni, and that was my first experience of Lebanon.
So you haven't visited Lebanon
before
you decided you're going to move to here?
It was like, I'd always wanted to go to Lebanon, and so I thought, well, what better reason than a marriage and my own,
And jump head first.
Yeah.
You don't even want to put your toes in to test the waters.
Well, my wife said, look, okay, I'll marry you, but we get married in Lebanon. That was the condition. So I said, well, that's easy.
There was still the occupation in Lebanon. The war was partially still going on.
Absolutely. The whole south was occupied. It was, the war, was going on. There was, it was brutal when I was here. There was tension between the two Palestinian factions. A scuffle broke out in Beirut while we were in Hazmiye. Some bullets came flying over the building. Everybody hit the floor. And then, my wife's little cousin told me, come on up to the roof. I went up to the roof. He said, you can get a much better view up here. And he was watching. Anyway, we go down. About 10 minutes later, everybody's up drinking coffee and like as if nothing happened. And it just hit me like, well, these people are used to war and they have adapted, and it's amazing. They keep living. So I was attracted by that. I was impressed by that. And so, anyway, we got married. We stayed here for a month. Went back to Utah. I'd spent all my youth studying philosophy and theology, so the only thing I could do was to continue my degrees in philosophy. So I did at the University of Utah, and I found a committee that would supervise the topic I was interested in, 19th century epistemology, and wrote my dissertation and got my PhD, and then came back here in '96. Was recruited by a dean who was in the States working for Notre Dame University, Lebanon, and took my position now. It'll be 30 years this coming summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
And, you know, just maybe for our audience, because this is your specialty, the history of Maronite church and relationship, can you explain to those who don't understand how the Maronite church joined the Catholic Church?
Yeah, it's a good question, Laith. Actually, you know, the Eastern, there, as I mentioned before, there are 26 different rites, rituals in the Catholic Church. And all of those 26 different rites go back to 5 major centers. So Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Egypt, Constantinople, and Rome. So the Maronite tradition goes back to Antioch, which is according to scripture, was the place where they were called Christians for the first time. Because, of course, as scripture says, and even secular historians tell us, that the small Jewish Christian community in Jerusalem was persecuted. And they left Jerusalem spreading the message to none but Jews in Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Syria. And so that tells us a lot about the history of this region and the Maronite church, even though the name Maron, who's a Syrian monk of the 4th century.
From the area just north of Aleppo.
Homs and Hama,
Yeah.
right. That's where the name comes from, Maronite. But actually the roots of the Maronites are even older than that. It goes back to the early Jewish Christian communities in Lebanon that accepted Christ as the Messiah. So our liturgy is one of the oldest liturgies in the world. And there's also a Chaldean Iraqi liturgy. It's very old. But you see really in our liturgy the Jewish roots of Christianity. So, you know, it took a while for Jews, believing Jews, to sort of realize that this new message of Jesus was universal. And so they were spreading the message to none but Jews at first, but then, you know, with the conversion of Saul, St. Paul, it became evident that Jesus' message was for the whole world, was universal. And so then the church, of course, disseminated west and east. And actually, we don't hear much about the dissemination of Christianity to the east. We hear a lot about the west and Rome. But there were Christian communities in Iraq, in India in the 1st century. There's strong evidence that Thomas, one of the apostles, went to India as in the 1st century. And there are still Syriac-speaking Christians in India.
Yes.
In fact, it's the main...
They call themselves Syrian Christians.
Some call
in the
themselves...
south.
Right,
Yeah.
That's right. You're familiar with that in Kerala.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
yes.
Kerala, yes.
So the Syro-Malabar and Syro-Malankara churches from India are also part of the Syriac churches that also trace their roots back to Antioch. So the Syro-Malabar, Syro-Malankara, the Syro-Maronites, we all have this Syriac link, and it goes back to Antioch. So so those, you know, people. Well, that's what makes the church Catholic, you know, from the Greek katoholos, according to the whole. There are different liturgies, different languages, different customs. The teaching is the same, but the inculturation of the teaching is different. And that's what makes the church Catholic. It's not monolithic.
So originally, obviously, Jesus Christ was preaching to the Canaanites originally, not to the Jews. But then we saw this change to preaching to the Jews with the original Christians. Is that how I'm understanding correctly things?
I don't think so. I mean, for the most part, Jesus' mission was to Jews. And the apostles who followed him, their mission also was to Jews. But there were moments in Jesus' life where he made it clear that my message is universal. Like when he comes to Sur, to Tyre.
Yeah.
And there's a church there, actually, in Sur, that commemorates this. The scriptures say a Syro-Phoenician woman came to Jesus and said, my daughter is sick or possessed by a demon. And he was sort of ignoring her. And then he finally turned to her. And this is something we don't expect to hear from Jesus because it's so harsh. He said, woman, it's not right to give the food from the tables to the dogs. I've come for the chosen tribe, the chosen tribes of Israel, the sons of Israel. And she says, yes, you're right about that, but even the dogs, they deserve something. And then Jesus says, never in all of Israel have I seen such faith.
Oh, yes.
So he raises this non-Jew, this Syro-Phoenician woman who is maybe our ancestor in some way, to a very high level. And then there are other indications in Jesus' life, Jesus' teaching, where it's clear that he's reaching out to the non-Jew. And then finally it becomes completely evident in the preaching of Paul and the mission to the apostles.
You were talking, of course, about Maghdouche Church, just outside Saida, and
Yes.
where Mother Mary would sit and wait for Jesus to come back from his preaching. And luckily, of course, the church wasn't harmed during this war, although the area around it was attacked. Yes. So it's still, if we can tell us how, because originally the Maronite Church did not belong to the Catholic Church, the unification that happened, I think it was in
Right.
the 12th century.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't get
Yes.
back to that question. Thank you. Actually, the Maronite Church, the Maronite Catholic Church, has always been Catholic. It wasn't affected by the Great Schism of 1054, in part because it didn't know about it, because this was a monastic church that started, as we said, in Homs and Homa in Syria, but then in the 6th and 7th century, started making its way towards Lebanon. And this is the standard story, right? And sort of the narrative is that they were persecuted by Muslims, right? And had to come because of the rise of Islam, into Lebanon for refuge. Actually, it wasn't that at all. The persecution actually came from Christians, from other Christian communities who had not accepted the ecumenical councils, whereas the Maronites had always remained faithful to the ecumenical councils, 325, 381. Actually, Pope Leo's visit to Istanbul before he came to Lebanon was to commemorate the 1700 years of the First Council of Nicaea, which is the first time that all the representatives of the Christian churches from those 5 centers I mentioned before were able to come together in a council to really to agree upon and to codify and to express in language what Christians believe, the creed, the Nu'min. So the Maronites were always committed to those ecumenical councils. And they weren't affected by the schism between East and West that happened in 1054. Because Constantinople and Rome, being empires, of course, this is the great temptation for religion, as we know, right? The political, worldly power. This came to a head in the 11th century, and there was a division between East and West. And that's where you have all the Orthodox churches. Patriarch Bartholomew, who was in Istanbul when Pope Leo met him, he is just recently, he's the head of the Orthodox churches, which is the largest traditional Christian church after the Catholic Church. Now, all those Orthodox churches have Catholic counterparts, Eastern Catholic counterparts, except the Maronites. The Maronites have no Orthodox counterpart. So really, it's not that the Maronites don't like to say we joined Rome. They sort of like to say Rome joined us.
Yeah.
You know? Because actually, at the time of the Crusades, which is a very, very interesting period to understand these divisions.
It was very traumatic, not only for the Muslims, but also for the Christian Arabic peoples and
Yes.
the Eastern Christians.
Yes, absolutely, because for the Maronites, when some of the Crusaders came to the East, they expected to find Christians that were against the West, right, against the Pope, because there was this division. And they found these Maronites in the mountains of Lebanon who said, who's Peter's successor these days? We'd like to send him a gift. And they were like, who are these? Who are these people? So it's a very interesting, an important part of that history, that the Maronites were never separated from Rome. And that is why, after this rediscovery, I don't want to say reunification, but rediscovery, the Maronite, the head of the Maronite monastery was honored with the title of Patriarch of Antioch in all the East, that first see of Christianity. So, and today our patriarch, the Maronite patriarch, has that title, Patriarch of Antioch in all the East. But today, because of the schism, there are 5 patriarchs of Antioch. And they're all in Lebanon, by the way. Nobody's in Antioch. There aren't enough Christians for a parish, probably there. But there are 3 Catholic patriarchs of Antioch and 2 Orthodox. And 2 of them were present when Pope Leo came for this visit. Later, in the 16th and 17th centuries, many of these Orthodox churches started reuniting to Rome. And that's where you get the other Eastern Catholic churches. So all the Eastern Catholic churches have an Orthodox counterpart, because not all of these Orthodox churches reunited to Rome. And the Maronites actually played a very important bridge in between East and West, in bringing some of the Orthodox churches into union with Rome. And that's where you get many of these Eastern Rite Catholics churches today.
Just a side note, Antioch is Antakya in Arabic. It is part of Syria that was given by the French to Turkey, and of course the Syrian Christians and Muslims of Antioch were expelled by the Turks in 1930 to what became Syria now. This is where now there's no presence of the Eastern Christians in Antioch. And for a while, it was Damascus that was hosting the representation. But now, again, we're left with Lebanon being the only safe space for such a presence. You moved to NDU to teach. It was a new university.
Yes.
When you moved.
Yeah.
And clearly it was needed, this university, to provide this service. How do you feel your teaching in this university and your background coming from the US with all this diversity behind. How do you feel this university is providing the service? Is it community changing with the presence of the university? The generations of people that you graduated, how do you feel their life has progressed after this?
Yeah, so when I came in, as I said, my first trip here was '88 to get married, and then when I came in '96, we'd already gotten our license, but we were in an old campus, some apartment buildings. The university, I'm not quite sure how it survived, because there was a real division that had been present during the war when the Christians fought one another. And that was present at the university, among the faculty, among the students. But somehow, with God's grace, we were able to kind of overcome those divisions somehow. Although during elections for the student clubs every year, there were always fights. This was a little new for me too, and a couple of times I saw some of the professors who came to the university armed, sort of concealed, but still I was like, that's a little different than the University of Utah.
Yes. Although Americans love to carry their guns everywhere.
In Utah especially,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
But not at the university, not in the 80s in the university. But there was a real energy, and there's a lot of life, and I really sort of fell in love with the university from the very beginning, and the students had so much energy, but so many things I wasn't used to. The students were smoking in the halls, sometimes even in the classrooms, and
yeah, Lebanese love their cigarettes, that's for sure.
And, well, there's some really funny stories if you want to hear. I remember my first year, I was asked, because as an American, to be on a committee, no smoking committee, a no smoking policy committee. So we're sitting there, and the chairman, calls everyone in. He said, "Okay, let's write this policy. In this day and age, it's absolutely unacceptable that anybody should be smoking on the university and university campuses." He's writing that. As he's taking out, he takes out a cigarette and starts smoking them, and then all the other committee members start, smoking. And what do you think, Dr. Hallo? Do you agree? Absolutely. It's absolutely. I mean, we have got to do something about this, And they're going around. I'm the new guy on the block, so. They get to me and say, "Dr. Alam, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, could we crack the window?" But it's a true story. Yeah. We do have a no smoking policy now, and I think it's working, for the most part. But there was a need, as you said, Laith, and the need really was English, because you had, of course, St. Joseph's University, a very good and solid university established by French Jesuits in the mid-19th century. They came early on. They were pioneers in many ways here in Lebanon, as the Jesuits were everywhere. But here, the French and Belgian Jesuits in particular, and they established this incredible institution, St. Joseph's, which is still going strong today. And they had the authority to issue the pontifical degrees from Rome. So Rome recognized their degrees in theology. And every country has one pontifical university, even if there are many Catholic universities in that country. And St. Joseph's, the Jesuits, was that pontifical university at the beginning. But then Maronite universities started to be established, and but it was all French. It was all francophone. Mm-hmm. So really, NDU was an attempt to provide an Anglo English education, and that is still part of our mandate. That English is the primary language of instruction. American liberal arts Catholic institution. So following the American liberal arts method, and So there was a need. But then some of the French-speaking universities, Catholic universities, started also moving to English because it just made sense.
It's an international
Yeah.
imperial
International
language that
right.
all of us are kind of drowned in.
Yeah.
And the other two English universities are originally
Right.
Protestant.
Exactly. AUB and
AUB and
right.
LAU.
Yes.
So it does make sense.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and excuse me, LAU had a role to play in the establishment of NDU. Before it was LAU, it was, LAU was also Beirut University College,
yes,
and then before
for
that,
women usually. Yes,
I think Beirut's Women's College, which was one of the earliest women's colleges in the world, actually, before some of the women's colleges in America. But we started as the Loizy School of Higher Education as a joint project with BUC before it became LAU. So BUC and LAU, later LAU, did help this Loizy School of Higher Education become a university, Notre Dame University, which was given its license in 1987.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I remember at the time I came as a philosopher, theologian, and we didn't have a degree. We didn't have degrees in philosophy and theology, and it was the first thing that I worked for. Let's have degrees in philosophy and theology. As a Catholic institution, we must, right? It's sort of expected. But I was told, well, we don't want the competition. The Holy Spirit University is focusing on in Catholic philosophy and theology in French, and let NDU focus on English, fields, topics, business, and engineering and hotel management and things like that. And I think at the time, the patriarch, the Maronite patriarch, who was actually from Ainibel.
And we're going to talk about your town, where you came from, in a minute.
Yeah.
But before we do that,
Yeah.
can we, maybe you wanted to finish that thought. You were trying to say something.
So the patriarch, the Maronite patriarch, he didn't want this division. He didn't want degrees in philosophy and theology to be given in English. And he didn't want this competition, really, because it's a small community anyway. So, we never did end up establishing degrees in philosophy and theology at NDU. Getting a little closer now, but still it wasn't a priority. And, I think in those days, many of the theologians didn't really think you could do serious philosophy and theology in English. Why would you do it in English? You should do it in French or, German, but not English.
You are doing a lot of research yourself beyond your teaching. You're writing a lot of papers. Maybe if you can explain to us some of this research that you're doing, because I think it's very interesting. People should be seeking them out if they have access to the university search systems. Your latest research?
My latest research is in the area of world history through the eyes of Lebanon. We have my colleague and I, Dr. Yusuf Rahmi, who's also Lebanese, but studied at the University of Chicago, and then was a tenured professor at the University of Michigan. He's come back to Lebanon, and we started a program called World History Through the Eyes of Lebanon. So it is a course in world history. So we begin with, the first writing in this Epic of Gilgamesh. And since the context of that epic takes place in part in the cedar forest, because of the motif of this king in Iraq moving from Iraq to this promised land of the cedars, which is overflowing and abundant, natural beauty and wealth. That old motif, which shows up in the Bible as well, of course, with Abraham coming to the promised land, it's older than the Bible, and this is the first known phonographic writing in history. The oral tradition is 5,000 years. The old. The texts are written in cuneiform, Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform, and they're, they're 3,000, 4,000 years old. So this is an epic that's 1,000 years older than Homer's Odyssey, And so we start with world history, begins with writing, phonographic writing. And we start in the Cedar Forest. We give lectures and then we go through world history. We do Phoenician history in Byblos, for instance. We work our way up through Roman history. We do Roman history in Baalbek. But it's not just history. My colleague's an historian, I'm a philosopher, theologian, so we sort of complement one another. We have a theme, and the overall theme sort of culminates in modern Lebanon with John Paul II's famous quote that Lebanon is more than a country. Lebanon is a message of coexistence, of pluralism, of openness, of hospitality. So that's sort of the underlying theme, but it's sort of revealed in the end, because we don't do Lebanese history, but it's world history, but Lebanese history is naturally brought in because it's world history through the eyes of Lebanon. And so those eyes are also Jewish eyes, Christian eyes, Islamic eyes, Druze eyes, all the ancient communities of Lebanon that made Lebanon what it is today. And that's my role, as working in religion and philosophy and theology. But then we continue. We do, as I said, Phoenician history in Byblos, Roman history in Baalbek, then we do Byzantine history in the north, along the coast, Tripoli and Shikha. We go to Crusader history in the castle, in the Crusader castle in Tripoli, which is still a military site, We have a whole week on the Crusades, and the lectures are in the castle. And we try to overcome, Laith, a lot of these stereotypes that are still, around today. That the Crusades, first of all, that they were purely religious wars between Christians and Muslims. That's certainly not the case. That's one theme, but it's certainly not the only one, or even the overriding one. And we try to push back on this narrative that sort of projects modern categories of colonialism and empire onto the Crusades, and so that as if there's some sort of unbroken strand between the Crusades and colonial and imperial ambitions coming from the West. So it's set up as this East against West, and then it necessarily falls into the church, and the popes and Islam, and we try to push back on that and show really that this is historically it's an anachronism. It's anachronistic to speak about it, to speak about the Crusades in this way. When we get to the modern period, we do speak about colonialism. We do speak about imperialism, and we come right up into the 19th century. We have, of course, many lectures on the rise of Zionism in the context of social Darwinism and Herbert Spencer's sort of new application of Darwin's theory of evolution to societies and race, and try to overcome. We read a little piece by Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism, where I think one of the best Jewish intellectual reflections on what she calls the myth of eternal anti-Semitism. And she has all kinds of evidence for this, We spend a lot of time on that. And of course, her argument is that, anti-Semitism is something that emerges in the 19th century. And she gives simple examples to prove it, I mean, in the 13th or 14th century, if you were a Jew and became a Christian, you were no longer considered a Jew, you were a Christian. But, in the 20th century, we have cases like, of course, the most famous, because she's a famous saint, and maybe someday doctor of the church, Edith Stein, Sister Benedict of the Cross, who becomes a Jewish woman, a student of Edmund Husserl, the father of phenomenology, one of his brightest students. She becomes a Catholic, a nun. Her sister also becomes a nun. Her parents, her mother, remains a devout Jew. But she has to leave Germany because the Nazis are after her. Yeah. And then she leaves, she goes to the Netherlands, I believe, and there they hunt her down there, and she ends up dying in Auschwitz.
Well, obviously Edward Said wrote a lot about that relationship of foundation of European identities, quote-unquote white identity, and the Eastern Mediterranean, the Arabic peoples, yes. The first other.
Right.
And we can spend a lot of time on that.
We bring in Edward Said, in fact, obviously, in this. We read a number of his works.
You also did a lot of travel with your work, and I think you told me before we got on air here is that you went to Iran multiple times.
Many times, yes.
Tell us about this and the relationship that you built there with the other philosophy and religion thinkers.
Sure, yes. Well, in 2001, with President Khatami in power in Iran, there was great hope for a kind of reconciliation after, what the United States really and the UK had done to overthrow the democratically elected leader in the early 50s in Iran.
Mossadegh.
Yes. And so, I think you and probably most of our viewers know the bad blood that existed, as the Iranian hostage crisis and the whole thing in the Iranian Revolution. But after, at the turn of the millennium, there was this hope, and Khatami sort of represented it. So there were quite a few Western scholars going to Iran at this time. And a professor of mine who had built strong ties with Iran invited me to go along since I was in Lebanon and it was easy for me to go too. Because, it wasn't always the case that Westerners would immediately get a visa to go. But what really opened my eyes to the great Iranian culture and the history of that Persian philosophy, which I had some knowledge of before, was the introduction of a center for human rights in Qom at Mofid University, which was established by Ayatollah Musavi, who was one of the only Ayatollah who wasn't with Khomeini, who didn't go into politics. He went into education. Went to Qom. I don't know if you've been to Qom, but it's a desert. Bought a huge piece of land, planted thousands of trees, watered it, and built a university, a modern university. And they had degrees in English literature, for instance. I was walking through their library, reading, Graham Greene and Evelyn Waugh and, Shakespeare. And he was really committed to education. Then I got to know his son, who was also in philosophy. He did his work on Willard Quine in Canada. We became friends. And when he became the director of this Center for Human Rights. And then they began having, after 2001, conferences, international conferences every 3 years. So we'd have a conference on human rights and peace, human rights and religion, And so I started going every 2 or 3 years. And then, well, of course, relations broke down, and Iran was called its axis of evil, and then, well, we know what happened. But yeah, I still have very good friends and contacts, and I was amazed, really, at when I would give lectures in Iran, how many women would come. They weren't philosophy students. They were just women who wanted to hear. I went, for instance, for the celebration of one of the great anniversaries of Ibn Sina. And, you know, the lecture halls were full of women, really there, you know, many of them were married, really there to, so they weren't there looking for husbands or something. They were there because they wanted to hear about philosophy, you know. And just the general conversations with people, the students, ordinary people. I just found it a very stimulating culture philosophically, very rooted, deeply rooted in its history. And yeah, and so we had this professor of mine from the United States had set up a program where Catholic philosophers would go to Qom for a year and give lectures on Thomas Aquinas. And Shiite philosophers would come from Qom to Washington, D.C. for a year and give lectures on Ibn Sina, for instance, or al-Ghazali, or any of the other great
philosophers, Ibn Arabi, or like
yes,
Ibn Khaldun.
Ibn Arabi, yes. So, yeah, yeah. All that has stopped now, unfortunately. I haven't been to Iran since 2018.
Wow.
Although it's easy for Lebanese to go, because I am a Lebanese citizen now.
Oh yes, we never talked about how you got your Lebanese citizenship.
Well, I got it through my wife, actually. I was trying to get it through my grandfather from the south, but it was just too complicated, and you know, because of the chaos of the south, and the also in part because of the Israeli occupation of the south for 18 years.
There was no records and stuff like
so
that. And obviously, you know, unfortunately, Arabic countries haven't yet allowed their women to give citizenship to their husbands or their children if their husband is not from. But you were one of those lucky ones.
1994, the Lebanese government opened up this window for, you know, any Lebanese spouse to give the Lebanese citizenship to their spouse, so woman or man. So my wife gave it to me, and
then it was closed behind you, that door. So I think your wife has been many blessings to you.
Yes, oh,
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sure your life is totally different with her presence, even here.
Absolutely.
It's important to have a strong woman to anchor a family.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt.
This tours to Iran, unfortunately, of course, they started with this 2001 war on terrorism, attack on Iraq, occupation of Iraq, destruction of Afghanistan, and then it ended with Trump being elected 2018.
2016.
Yeah. So this is how it's almost like there was an evil event that created dialogue, and now we have an evil event that ended dialogue. But between all of this, or just after that, there was supposed to be a trip for the previous Pope to Lebanon. We know Pope Leo just was here in Lebanon a few weeks ago, a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
Tell us about that story of the hopes to have the Pope arrive to Lebanon before Corona and before the war started.
Right, yeah.
And what happened there, and how you prepared for this new Pope, Leo, to arrive.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's you know, it's really remarkable that Lebanon, this little country, has had popes visit it 3 times in 30 years. So my first year in Lebanon, as I mentioned, was 96. The very next year, John Paul II came. And he wrote more about Lebanon in his official magisterial teachings than he did about his native Poland.
Wow.
I mean, imagine that. And I was so moved by that. John Paul II is one of my heroes. I named my youngest son after him, actually, because John Paul II came in '97. My wife was pregnant with him, and my wife said if we went down to greet the Pope as he was, driving by, she said, if it's a boy, let's name him John Paul. And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So, he, in his writings, I studied his writings on Lebanon and was fascinated by them, the depth. He was a philosopher. I mean, he was an original philosopher, really Polish philosopher, thinker, logician, master of hermeneutics. He saw something in Lebanon that maybe some of the Lebanese didn't see. And it was crystallized in this famous statement, which unfortunately is now in some parts of Lebanon become cliche, or it's used for the wrong reasons. But he said Lebanon, I said it before, Lebanon is more than a country. It's a message. It's a message of what? It's a message of coexistence, of pluralism, of acceptance, of love, of openness, of hospitality. And that was in '97. We'd already gone through a brutal 15-year civil war. And some of the critics said, what is he talking about? This country has been filled with violence and sectarian divisions. But he saw through this, I think, and looked at the long history of Lebanon. Taking the long view, there has been coexistence and exemplary moments and eras of coexistence. And not just between Christians and Muslims, but we often forget about the Lebanese Jews and the role they played historically in making Lebanon what it was, and even in the writing of Lebanon's constitution in '43. Their schools, the Lebanese Jews, their schools were some of the best in the region. And it's very interesting to look at the position they take, in the 20s against, revisionist Zionism and Theodor Herzl and this whole push for a Jewish state. Most of the Lebanese Jews were against it. Very few Lebanese Jews went to Israel in '48. Actually, in '48, the Lebanese Jewish community doubled in Lebanon because there was anti-Semitism going on, especially after 1967, in other parts of the Arab world. But it certainly wasn't this eternal anti-Semitism, and it wasn't ubiquitous. There's the famous, we read him in our course on world history, Avi Shlang, the professor of the Iraqi Jew who's professor at Oxford, who really, he's one of these, the new historians in Israel who, once he got access to the archives, began to write the true history of what happened in the catastrophe and 1948.
Most of the Arabic or Jewish Arabs, because they are Arabs before they are Jewish, were targeted by Zionist terrorism in order to force them out of Iraq or other places like Syria, or the Zionists paid the corrupt kings like the king of Iraq or the king of Morocco per head to expel the Jewish Arabs. And this Zionism is not ours, it is a European invention, and these Jewish communities tried and attempted to stay where they are. Yes. I can tell you a story about my grandmother and the people that replaced them, but that's a different time for that.
Yes. But just, excuse me,
yes.
Yeah, just to finish that line of thought about this message, Lebanon is a message. Unfortunately, the Jewish communities disappeared. 81, the last of the Jewish communities in Wadu Abu Jamil left. Ironically, when the IDF hit the synagogue, some people still argue whether it was intentional or not. I think it was because there was, it seemed to me that it really bothered the state of Israel that there were still Jews in Lebanon. It's like, why would you be in this Arab country when we have our own state, you know? And they knew every family in Beirut, every Jewish family, because I have colleagues, I have friends who are Lebanese Jews who are still here. I mean, they in their religious conviction, they're Christians now, but they're from the Lebanese Jewish community. And they've told me the stories about how they were visited by the IDF.
I grew up with a Lebanese or Jewish Lebanese person in Montreal.
Oh, really?
From the Dahan family. And his mother spoke Arabic. She would be cursing him in Arabic all the time. And he would ask me to translate what she's cursing. But they definitely did not identify as Zionists, and they would rather live in Montreal than ever live in occupied Palestine. That shows you most of the Syrian and Lebanese Jews did not, even after all this plot to remove them from their homelands, they refused to go to Palestine and ended up in New York and in Montreal.
Brazil, we recruited students. We had a program for this world history through the eyes of Lebanon. We wanted to reach out to Lebanese Jews in Brazil, and we actually had put together a special course, World History through the Eyes of Lebanon, focusing on this event, these events in the late 19th, early 20th century that affected the Jews, the Arab Jews. And it was such an eye-opener there, I mean, because they were speaking about the Lebanese rabbi, you know, and the Lebanese synagogue in São Paulo. And we met the rabbi, and he's Lebanese, speaks Lebanese, you know, and had great affection for and great memories for Lebanon, great memories of Lebanon. And there was a desire on their part to come back and just at least for a visit, to take our course. That particular course never happened, but for many different reasons.
We will have a second, for sure, meeting with you because there's so much to talk about. But I want to have one impression from you about Pope Leo's visit to here.
Right. Right. I'm sorry, I was digressing.
No. There's so much to tell. And
well, because I started with John Paul II.
Yeah.
So then in 2012, Benedict came, which was also an incredible visit. And I know for a fact, because I hold the Benedict chair and I work with the Benedict Foundation in Rome, the Joseph Ratzinger Benedict Foundation in Rome, that Benedict's most memorable and heartfelt trip was his trip to Lebanon. And he wrote about it, and everyone around him knew it. He loved Lebanon, he loved that trip. He was encouraged by the love that he received from Christians and Muslims. I've done a lot of research on that, on all of his talks, from the interview that he had when he was coming on the plane, because some were sort of pushing this idea that you're coming to support the Christians because the Christians are leaving Lebanon, and this was this was kind of on the forefront. And he said, yes, that's all true, but Muslims are leaving Lebanon too. So I'm coming for everyone. So Benedict was very misunderstood Pope, I believe, when it comes to Islam. I've written a scholarly piece titled Benedict in Islam, from Regensburg to Istanbul and back again, highlighting how Benedict, what he did in Istanbul after being misinterpreted at Regensburg in that famous Regensburg address that angered many Muslims around the world, but misinterpreted on purpose, I think, in the West. We won't go into that, by whom and for what reason, but I did a lot of work on that. So Benedict 2012, Francis, as you said, wanted to come, but the war and other, that history at least isn't known completely to me. There's a lot of hearsay about why he didn't end up coming, but it had to do with the situation, I think, in general. That was one of the main reasons. Leo's visit to Turkey was really kind of following up on something that Francis had wanted to do and really had already set in place. Now, Francis had wanted to come to Lebanon, but nothing was really set in place. So I like to say that Leo's first pontifical visit was to Lebanon. I mean, it's to Turkey, but that's sort of finishing up the work and the vision and you know.
It wasn't also an official, like the Turkish government wasn't his, who invited him to Turkey. It was the Orthodox patriarch and so forth. So,
right.
So it kind of can be not considered a visit to Turkey, but to a visit to the Orthodox Church.
Yes, I mean, it was also an official state visit. I mean, but you're right. The main reason was to celebrate this Council of Nicaea 325. And to go to the site, and the ruins have been recently uncovered. Actually, we know where the meeting took place. But yes, and what he did there, Leo did there, was continue this process of ecumenism between Catholics and Orthodox that was started in 1967 by Paul VI. And the foundation of which was Vatican II, the last of the ecumenical councils. So the first ecumenical council, 325. The last, the 21st, was 1961 to 65 Vatican II, which set this the space and the tone for interreligious dialogue with Christians, Jews, with Christian dialogue with Jews and Muslims and all other religions.
And Leo wanted to go visit the south. There was a veto kind of by Prime Minister Nawaf Salam.
Yeah, this is now. I'm writing about this. I'm still trying to find out. I'm still trying to uncover everything, because we have official speeches, and thank God we have official speeches, because there's so much misinterpretation going on. I was in a conversation with a colleague of mine, a Maronite Christian colleague of mine, who he's convinced that he was hoping before Leo came that he would kind of put his foot down and tell the resistance to disarm. And I told him that's ridiculous. Certainly he won't do that. That's not what he's coming to do. In fact, if anything, it's pushing back on that and calling for Lebanese unity. So you mentioned the Prime Minister. I don't know if you heard his speech two days ago. I didn't think I was listening to Nawaf Salam. I don't know if you heard it at the Doha. The rhetoric was completely different. It wasn't focusing on the resistance as the problem. Much closer aligned with the president, and I mean even some of the words. I'm going to have to try to document this. That I saw coming from Pope Leo's call for unity. So he didn't go to the South. He mentioned the South a number of times. He at the youth meeting in Kirki, there were women from the South. There was who were testifying to what had happened. A lot has been written about this letter he received in Kirki from Hezbollah. He didn't reveal the contents, which he wouldn't. But the disinformation, so those voices.
That Al Jazeera interview that quoted him saying that.
Yeah, that wasn't a quote from him. I mean, that was he never mentioned Hezbollah or resistance surrendering their arms. That is not the case, and he wouldn't. I mean, it's not what popes do, and this pope especially. Following in the line of Francis, who met in Iraq with Sistani against so much opposition, this Pope also following in the footsteps of Francis in that way, and Benedict, and John Paul II, so that's why I'm looking at the speeches. These are official addresses from the Holy Father, and they're footnoted, and the footnotes, you see, Francis, Benedict, John Paul II, you see the continuity of this idea that Lebanon is a message of unity, of peace, of coexistence. So I personally, Laith, was very heartened by the Pope's visit. I was invited by the apostolic delegate, since I'm a member of the dicastery of culture and education, to attend some of the events. And yeah, it was like when John Paul II came. I had that spirit of hope, and I still have it. I think it changed things. I hope that, you know, God's grace came through the visit. I believe it did. The prayers of so many Christians and Druze, and I don't know if you saw the interreligious event that they had in Martyrs Square. Mm-hmm. The Pope was really moved by that, and I know that from the apostolic.
And he made a choice to drive through the Dahi on his way to the presidential palace.
When he first came. Yes. I was just with my very good friend whose daughter was among the scouts who greeted him, you know. And that was all set up. I mean, you know, the Pope wanted the scouts in the Dahi, South Dahi, to be there to greet him, you know. I mean, it was all arranged. And these are very powerful symbols, you know. I was hoping, you know, he would stay here with us and to protect us, because I don't think you would know better. You know better than I would. I don't think while he was here there were any that Israel attacked Lebanon. I'm not sure during those days.
No, during those days, no. But obviously, everybody's worried about the return of full-scale war anytime soon. And there was just before the arrival of Pope Leo, the assassination of the commander-in-chief of Hezbollah's military wing, and maybe the Zionists did it on purpose in hopes that Hezbollah will retaliate, and then the whole visit of the Pope would be ruined or delayed. But obviously Hezbollah were very patient and did not ruin this moment for the whole Lebanese population. Right. Of course, Pope Francis had a very, very close relationship with the Palestinians in Gaza during the genocide, and was on the phone with them every day. Right. I'm sure Pope Leo cares about the people as a whole, not only the Christians of Palestine or Lebanon, human, and this is the land of Jesus of Palestine, Jesus of Galilee. The Syrian Christians are now suffering, refugees here, the first churches of Ma'lula and others are unknown, their fate. We hope that he keeps us in his prayers. Dr. Edward Alam, thank you so
much. Thank you, Laith. This was so, really, I was so elated to be here, and I appreciated the questions. And, you know, I forgot to mention the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Pizzaballa, was here. He was here for the trip. That has to really be emphasized, because he has been really one of the great voices for Palestine. And he's the one who offered, because he had open dialogue with Hamas. He said, I will go in as a hostage, you know, to release the children. Release the children. And his writings have been very, very strong. And his presence in Lebanon, it wasn't talked about much, but I think it was extremely important that this, and he was also one of the names for, you know, in the conclave to be the next pope. Yes, of course. And people in the whole East were hoping a pope will come out of there. But, you know, we still have that time. And there's been many priests, Catholic, Maronite, others that helped in the resistance over the last 100 years. Capucci in Syria, you know, is one of them. And we salute them for standing up for the unfortunate, the oppressed in this world. This is the tradition of Jesus, our beloved. Thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Alam, and we will definitely have a second
with you because there's so much to talk about. We just touched the surface of these deep conversations. I hope all the audience enjoyed this and can go look for more of the writings of Dr. Alam. And you are still watching Free Palestine TV. Wartime Cafe. Behind the camera is both Hadi Hotait and Rabih Ghannam. We ask you to press the subscribe button on whatever social media platform you're watching this on, and to go to our website, freepalestine.video, to donate so we can continue bringing you this content. And until we see you next time, we wish you all a world free of colonialism, imperialism, and Zionism.